Howdy y'all, TheJTJ here with my tutorial, CV Curve Tool. Alright, today we're going to be making some CV curves, and the way you open that option box is you can come up to Create, go down to CV Curve Tool, and let's click on the options. If the window comes in floating, you can always move it to the left until your view sort of moves like that, and then you can dock it. If when it appears you don't see all the options, move your mouse until you get the double arrows, then you can left click and sort of drag it out. Alright, the first thing of note is if you're making your CV curve in the perspective view, it is going to make it on the grid. So it's not truly 3D in this view. It's just going to lay it right on the grid, and then later you can go and manipulate it. So it's usually better to make it in one of the other views, like front, top, or side, and today we'll use the front view. It's also handy to remember if you're going to revolve something with your CV curve, sort of make it in the view that it's going to revolve in, and it'll just save you a little time from rotating that later. Always reset your tool when you begin, unless you know exactly what you want your settings to be. And something else of note is the 3 snap 2s are very handy when using any kind of curve tool. So today we're going to be using snap to grid, and you can access that by holding down the X key. So we're going to need to click 4 times to make a 3 cubic curve. Hold down the X key. I'm going to click once here, 2, 3, and 4. Now I'm continuing to hold down the left mouse button, and if you do that, you can still manipulate your curve. And notice that it's still snapping to the grid. You can release, and it'll lock that point there. If you're not satisfied where a point is after you've released the left key, you can always hold down the middle mouse button, and it will become active. And now you can move it again. Once you're satisfied with where you want to go, you just simply release. If you're not happy where your point that it ended up and you want to change that or just delete that control point, you can press delete while it's active, and it will delete the last one. And once again, I'm just going to left click and go ahead and complete that curve. Now the curve comes in a little bit boxy, and that's okay. We're going to fix that in a second, or if you want to see it right now, you can press 1, 2, or 3. So I'll go ahead and hit enter to complete the curve. I can press 1, 2, or 3 to smooth it out, and there you have it. That's a 3 cubic curve. Now we'll go cover these real fast. Linear is probably, other than 3 cubic, your most used curve tool. So it just makes straight lines. So I'm going to hold the X key and click 1, 2. Notice that it only takes 2 clicks to make a 1 linear. 3 and 4. I'm going to go ahead and end that by pressing enter. Press the W key so I can move that out of the way. And it makes boxes. It's very handy for if you're making something that has, maybe buildings or something that's going to be very, very geometric. 2 is going to take 3 clicks to make your curve, so we're going to hold the X key and begin. 1, 2, 3, the curve is started, and 4, we're going to hit enter to go ahead and finish that, and press 3 to smooth it out. Now notice here that this curve is a lot closer to the hull. It can be handy to use this if you're trying to get sort of something that's closer to the hull. It's going to be easier to manipulate later if you want to change things around by moving the control points on the hull. I'll go ahead and move this out of the way. The 3 Bezier curve. In Bezier, you will notice that if you've worked in Illustrator or other vector software, that is a familiar name. There's not going to be much difference with this curve as opposed to the 3 cubic. Just sort of the math involved with it will change. So I'm going to hold the X key. 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm going to press enter to finish it, and notice that there's virtually no difference. It's just the math behind it that is sort of changed. The 5 will require us to click 6 times, so I'm going to hold the X key. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I'm going to end that by pressing enter, and I'm going to have and press 3 to smooth it. Notice it was very similar to our 3 cubic curve. It gives you more points to manipulate later on if you're going to change this around and you're going to sort of mess with those control points. I'm going to select it. I'm going to press W. Alright, 7 is the next one, and I'm going to hold the X key. I'm going to click 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Go ahead and end that by pressing enter. Go ahead and press 3 to smooth it. Notice that this one's probably a little bit closer to 2. It's in between 7 and 5. You're going to get a lot more control with this because there's a lot more control points to sort of manipulate. Let's move that out of the way. Alright. 9 times out of 10 you're going to use linear or cubic. Occasionally you can use 2, but most of the time you're going to be on 3 cubic or 1 linear. The knot spacing, the difference is when you draw something out, and remember that this one we drew 3 cubic uniform, and I'll go ahead and switch to 3 cubic chord length and draw one on top of it. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to finish that by pressing enter and press 3. They're virtually identical. Visually they are the same. However, the difference comes under the min-max value. So notice that this was the chord length, and if we select it, it's going to be 0 to 4. And the chord length on the 3 cubic is going to be 0 to 1, and it's always going to be 0 to 1. The chord length varies depending on how many points you've clicked, how big the curve is, and stuff like that. The difference between the two is that chord length is good for texturing if you're going to have a NURBS plane, or you're going to loft something with a from this curve, and you're going to have a NURBS sort of plane or a NURBS shape. It's really nice for the texturing of it. That's sort of the benefit. So it's worth trying that if you're going to do something especially organic and you're going to keep it on the NURBS and you want to texture it. Try using the chord length. If you're just going to sort of make a curve that you're going to use for a path, maybe an animation path or maybe something like that, you can keep it on uniform. It's more predictable. So sort of it's probably better to use this, especially if you're just going to do something simple. The final is multiple end knots, and I'll draw that. I'll go ahead and take that off. Notice that all of these were drawn with multiple end knots, so I'll take that off. I'll hold the X key. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Press enter to finish it, and the curve that it makes is very small. It's using the math of both the start and end. However, it's sort of detached from those end nodes, those end knots. It can be better when you're trying to attach curves to one another. However, the uses can just vary on if you need something like this. The majority of the time, you're going to use multiple end knots. And if you're just starting out with the curve tool, I just suggest just reset the tool, use 3 cubic uniform and multiple end knots until you get like a really good hang of it, and then you can start changing out things to sort of play around. And that does it for CV Curve Tool. Thanks for watching.